The deluded plan that has Buckingham Palace terrified. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. What I'm about to share with you today is absolutely sickening. Multiple publishing industry sources are confirming that Prince Andrew, or as he's now known, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, is actively planning a tell-all memoir, and you won't believe what angle he's planning to take. Despite decades of friendship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, despite Virginia Giuffre's devastating posthumous memoir that detailed paying him $15,000 per encounter, despite being stripped of all his titles and evicted from his home by his own brother, Andrew apparently believes he is the victim. Sources say he's deluded and filled with anger and genuinely plans to paint himself as a casualty of Me Too and woke movements rather than a man held accountable for his own choices. Publishers are reportedly showing huge interest. Andrew sees this as his financial lifeline, and Buckingham Palace is absolutely terrified because, as one insider put it, Andrew knows where the bodies are buried. This isn't just about one man's desperate attempt at rehabilitation. This is about whether someone accused by multiple Epstein victims will be given a platform to rewrite history and play victim. So let's dive into everything we know about this disgusting plan and why it has the palace in full crisis mode. Virginia Giuffre's devastating memoir, The Truth Andrew Can't Escape. Nobody's Girl, a posthumous bombshell. Before we can understand Andrew's desperate plan to write his own memoir, we need to talk about the book that's made his life even more impossible. Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir, Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. Virginia Giuffre died by suicide in April 2025 at the age of 41. Her memoir was published in October 2025, and it reignited global scrutiny of Andrew in ways that made his situation absolutely untenable. For years, Andrew had been able to hide behind denials, settlements without admissions of guilt, and the palace's protective walls. But Giuffre's memoir, told in her own words, with specific details that couldn't be dismissed as legal maneuvering, changed everything. The $15,000 revelation one of the most shocking details from Giuffre's memoir was the price tag attached to her first night with Andrew. According to her account, she was given $15,000 for that initial encounter when she was just 17 years old. Think about what that means. This wasn't some casual social interaction that's been mischaracterized. This was, according to Giuffre, a transaction. Money changed hands. A teenage girl was paid to have sex with a British prince. Giuffre described Andrew as entitled and acting as if he had the right to have sex with her. She wrote about meeting him at Ghislaine Maxwell's London townhouse in March 2001. When Maxwell allegedly prompted Andrew to guess Jenna's age, Giuffre was using the name Jenna at the time. According to Giuffre, Andrew replied, 17. She also wrote that Andrew told her, "My daughters are just a little younger than you. Princess Beatrice would have been 12 at the time, and Princess Eugenie would have been 10. The three encounters Giuffre's memoir detailed three separate sexual encounters with Andrew. First, the London encounter at Maxwell's townhouse when Giuffre was 17. Second, a sexual encounter in New York. Third, an orgy involving Andrew and approximately 8 other girls, all of whom seemed and appeared to be under the age of 18 and didn't really speak English. These aren't vague allegations. These are specific, detailed accounts with locations, timelines, and corroborating details that align with flight logs and photographic evidence. The infamous photograph. The memoir also contextualized the famous photograph of Andrew with his arm around Giuffre's bare waist, with Ghislaine Maxwell smiling in the background. That photo, taken at Maxwell's London home, has haunted Andrew for years. Giuffre's memoir provided the before and after, what led to that moment, what happened after the photo was taken, how Maxwell orchestrated the entire encounter. For Andrew, who has spent years trying to cast doubt on that photograph, he even suggested in his disastrous Newsnight interview that it might have been doctored. Giuffre's first-person account made his denials seem increasingly desperate and unbelievable. The harassment campaign, perhaps most damning, Giuffre detailed how Andrew's team allegedly hired internet trolls to harass her after her allegations became public. After casting doubt on my credibility for so long, Prince Andrew's team had even gone so far as to try to hire internet trolls to hassle me. "The Duke of York owed me a meaningful apology as well," Giuffre wrote. She described Andrew as hiding behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, refusing to face accountability, and engaging in a smear campaign designed to destroy her credibility. The settlement that wasn't enough. In 2022, Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement with Giuffre for an undisclosed sum, reportedly in the millions of dollars. He didn't admit wrongdoing, but he did acknowledge Giuffre's suffering as a victim of sex trafficking and agreed to make a donation to her charity. But Giuffre made clear in her memoir that the settlement wasn't satisfying. "We would never get a confession, of course. That's what settlements are designed to avoid," she wrote. "But we were trying for the next best thing, a general acknowledgement of what I'd been through." She also revealed that she agreed to a 1-year gag order, which seemed important to the prince because it ensured that his mother's platinum jubilee would not be tarnished any more than it already had been. In other words, Andrew paid her to be quiet during a crucial period for the royal family. The impact on Andrew's standing Giuffre's memoir, coming after her tragic death by suicide, carried enormous emotional weight. This wasn't someone seeking money or fame. She had already settled her case and was dead when the book was published. This was her final testimony, her last chance to tell her truth. Her family released a statement calling the publication of Andrew's title "Stripping a Victory." Today, an ordinary American girl, from an ordinary American family, brought down a British prince with her truth and extraordinary courage. Sky Roberts, Giuffre's brother, told CNN it had been a joyous and happy and sad day. The memoir made it impossible for the royal family to continue protecting Andrew. Within days of its publication, King Charles took the extraordinary step of stripping Andrew of his remaining titles and initiating his eviction from Royal Lodge. The memoir plan. Andrew knows where the bodies are buried. Publishers are interested now, against this backdrop of Giuffre's devastating posthumous memoir and his complete public disgrace. Andrew is reportedly planning to write his own book. And according to publishing industry sources, there's significant interest. No contracts have been finalised, but there is considerable interest from publishers, an insider told The Express. Another source confirmed to IB Times UK that several houses have expressed huge interest in a manuscript from Andrew. Think about that for a moment. Despite everything, or perhaps because of everything, publishers see Andrew's story as commercially valuable. A tell-all from a disgraced royal would sell millions of copies, generate massive media coverage, and dominate news cycles for months. The financial lifeline. For Andrew, the memoir represents more than just a chance to tell his side of the story. It's potentially his only way out of a dire financial situation. For Andrew, a book represents both a potential financial lifeline and an opportunity to claim that he has been unjustly handled, a source told The Express. The insider added, Andrew could be offered a heavy sum to pen a tell-all memoir which would stabilise his financial situation. Let's understand just how desperate Andrew's financial situation has become. He's facing mounting legal costs from years of litigation, the loss of his Royal Lodge lease. He was paying virtually nothing for a $30 million property, eviction to a much smaller property on the Sandringham estate, no income from royal duties since 2019. Questions about how he afforded the multi-million-dollar settlement with Giuffre. At its core, this is a financial problem for Andrew, a palace aide said. His liabilities are mounting, legal costs have not eased, and there is little willingness within the family to step in. The palace's worst nightmare. But here's what has Buckingham Palace absolutely terrified. Andrew has decades of insider knowledge about the royal family's private conversations, decisions, and secrets. Andrew knows where the bodies are buried, and that makes the idea of a memoir extraordinarily sensitive for the royal family, because it could expose private conversations and long-held secrets, a source warned. Think about what Andrew knows. He's been a senior member of the royal family for 65 years. He's been present for private family discussions about Diana's death and its aftermath, decisions about how to handle various royal scandals, behind-the-scenes manoeuvring during constitutional crises, personal information about his siblings, their marriages, their children, details about how the monarchy actually functions behind the palace walls. This isn't Harry writing spare, with a couple decades of adult royal life to draw from. This is someone who's been in the inner circle for over 6 decades, who was once considered the Queen's favourite son, who attended the most sensitive family meetings and state discussions. This knowledge makes the prospect of a memoir a terrifying scenario for Buckingham Palace, as it could expose decades of confidential conversations and family secrets, an insider told IB Times UK, that tugged a Me Too victim angle. Now here's the part that's absolutely sickening. Despite being associated with one of the world's most notorious sex traffickers, despite multiple detailed allegations from Epstein victims, Andrew apparently plans to position himself as the victim. Shockingly, another insider told us Andrew would paint himself as a victim of the Not Me Too and woke movements in his tome, a source told Radar Online. The insider continued, "Despite being associated with the world's most notorious traffickers, Jeffrey Epstein, Andrew is so deluded and filled with anger he genuinely feels he is the victim in his downfall, not the actual victims left in Epstein's wake. It's this narrative he will want to write in his book." Let me say that again, because it's almost unbelievable. Andrew apparently believes that he is the victim of the Me Too movement, not the teenage girls who were trafficked to him by Jeffrey Epstein. Sources describe Andrew as deluded and filled with anger, genuinely convinced that he's been unjustly treated, that public opinion would soften if his version of the story were fully aired. The image rehabilitation fantasy. According to insiders, Andrew remains convinced that a memoir could rehabilitate his image. Andrew feels deeply wronged by how events have unfolded, one royal insider said. He is fully convinced that public opinion would soften if his version of the story were fully aired, and he wants to cast himself as someone who was misled and ultimately betrayed. This is the same man who gave one of the most disastrous television interviews in royal history, the infamous 2019 Newsnight interview where he claimed he couldn't sweat, that he was at Pizza Express with his daughter on the night in question, and that the photo of him with Giuffre might have been doctored. That interview was so catastrophic that it led directly to him stepping down from royal duties. It made him look evasive, entitled, and completely lacking in empathy for Epstein's victims, and yet Andrew apparently believes that if he just gets to tell his story in his own words, at greater length, people will understand and forgive him. It's a level of delusion that's almost staggering. The eviction crisis, April 2026, deadline looming, the Royal Lodge situation. To understand the desperation driving Andrew's memoir plans, we need to understand his current housing crisis. For over 2 decades, Andrew has lived in Royal Lodge, a magnificent 30-room mansion in Windsor Great Park. Here's the thing that made this arrangement particularly galling to the British public. Andrew paid just $1 million for the lease to Royal Lodge in 2003, and since then he's paid only a peppercorn rent, which is a legal term meaning rent technically exists to make the lease valid, but in reality no money is actually paid. Think about that. A 30 million mansion, rent-free, for over 20 years. The lease was supposed to last until 2078, meaning Andrew thought he had secured this incredible deal for the rest of his life. Crown Estate would need to pay him around $558,000, approximately $747,000, if he gave up the lease voluntarily. But in October 2025, when King Charles stripped Andrew of his titles, he also served formal notice for Andrew to surrender the lease and move out. The April 2026 deadline. According to royal editor Rebecca English of the Daily Mail, Andrew has been given a firm deadline, Easter 2026, which falls on April 5th. "I am told the plan is that Andrew will be out of Royal Lodge by Easter," English wrote on January 3rd, when the royal family traditionally gather on the Windsor estate, helpfully avoiding another potentially tricky encounter. The symbolism is deliberate. Each year, the royal family attends church at St George's Chapel on the grounds of Windsor Castle, then heads to a family lunch on Easter Sunday. Despite stepping down from royal duties, Andrew has shown up for Easter services in 2023, 2024, and 2025. King Charles apparently wants him gone before Easter 2026, so the family doesn't have to deal with the awkwardness of Andrew still living in Royal Lodge just down the road while they're trying to celebrate a major holiday. Where is he going? Andrew is supposed to move to Marsh Farm, a property on the Sandringham estate about 100 miles north of London, But here's the problem. The property is described as quite small and needs a lot of work doing on it to make it habitable and secure. According to royal experts, this raises serious questions about whether the renovation work can be completed by the April deadline. This has raised questions over whether this work can be completed by the deadline, English wrote, leading to the extraordinary prospect that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who remains 8th in line to the throne, could actually find himself homeless for a short period of time next spring. Yes, you read that correctly. Former prince, who's 8th in line to the throne, might literally be homeless in April 2026 because he's refused to leave Royal Lodge voluntarily and the alternative accommodation isn't ready yet. Andrew's resistance sources say Andrew has shown little urgency about moving and is being utterly pig-headed about the situation. He really is a man with a habit of making terribly bad decisions, one source told Marie Claire. According to reports, Andrew doesn't think he should have to move and believes King Charles has an ulterior motive for wanting him out of Royal Lodge. Some sources suggest Andrew thinks Charles wants to give the property to Prince William and Princess Kate for when they eventually become King and Queen. I don't think he's in any rush to leave, an insider noted, but he may not have a choice. King Charles has reportedly been willing to use extraordinary tactics to force his brother out. The teddy bear hostage situation. This next part sounds almost too bizarre to be true, but multiple outlets have reported it. King Charles might force Andrew out by confiscating his teddy bears. Yes, you read that right. Teddy bears. Andrew is somewhat obsessed with teddy bears, a source told the Express. It's even been recently reported that he's currently so lonely he's taken to chatting to the plush toys as if they were close friends. According to the reports, Charles could arrange for someone to pack up the stuffed toys as a form of emotional leverage, forcing Andrew to quit Royal Lodge by the start of January 2026. The scenario was even described as potentially being a Christmas present to the rest of the nation. While the teddy bear angle sounds almost comical, it reveals something darker. Andrew is apparently so isolated, so alone, that he's talking to stuffed animals for companionship. Royal author Robert Hardman suggested another tactic. The Royal Collection, which owns quite a lot of the treasures inside there, may say, well, we can't be confident that this place is safe anymore, and they'll start taking the paintings and some of the furniture away. In other words, Charles could systematically strip Royal Lodge of all its valuable contents, leaving Andrew in an increasingly empty, uncomfortable mansion until he has no choice but to leave. Sarah Ferguson's dilemma. Andrew's ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, who has lived with him at Royal Lodge for the past 20 years, also needs to find new accommodation. Early reports suggested she might move to Portugal, where Princess Eugenie owns property, take up residence in Princess Beatrice's granny annex in the Cotswolds, move abroad entirely, but more recent reports suggest Sarah is simply looking for a place in Windsor, wanting to stay near her daughters and grandchildren. The eviction affects both Andrew and Sarah, two people who have maintained an unusual but apparently functional living arrangement for 2 decades since their divorce. The memoir as revenge, Harry's spare as the template, the Prince Harry comparison. Any discussion of Andrew's potential memoir inevitably leads to comparisons with Prince Harry's Spare, which was published in 2023 and became one of the best-selling memoirs in history. Spare demonstrated both the financial rewards and the personal costs of a disgraced royal breaking ranks with the family. Harry's book reportedly earned him a multi-million-dollar advance and sold over 1.4 million copies in its first week in the US alone. But it also deepened rifts within the royal family, burned bridges that might never be rebuilt, and arguably damaged Harry's standing with significant portions of the British public. Andrew's calculations about whether to write his own memoir are further complicated by watching what happened to Harry, sources say. He understands that publishing a memoir would almost certainly sever his remaining ties to the family, an insider revealed. What would Andrew reveal? If Andrew does write this memoir, what secrets might he expose? Sources suggest he has decades of material that would be devastating for the palace. Diana's death. Aftermath. Andrew was a senior royal during the week following Diana's death. He would have been privy to private family discussions about how to handle the crisis, the tensions between Charles and the Spencer family, and the decisions about William and Harry's involvement in the funeral, the Elizabeth and Philip marriage. As their son, Andrew would have intimate knowledge of his parents' relationship, including the difficult periods and how they navigated royal life together. Charles and Camilla. Andrew has watched his brother's relationship with Camilla play out over decades, from the affair during Charles's marriage to Diana through to their eventual marriage and Camilla's coronation as Queen. The Harry and Meghan crisis. Andrew was still a working royal when Harry and Meghan's departure was being negotiated. He would know what was discussed behind closed doors. His own finances. Andrew could potentially reveal where the money came from for his settlement with Giuffre, how he's funded his lifestyle since losing his public funding, and whether other family members have been supporting him financially. Palace operations. Decades of knowledge about how the monarchy actually functions, who makes what decisions, how scandals are managed, and what the family is really like in private. The idea of him actually exposing these conversations and secrets is what keeps palace officials up at night, a source said. The promise he already made. Here's an interesting wrinkle. In October 2025, when King Charles was still trying to negotiate Andrew's departure from Royal Lodge peacefully, Andrew reportedly promised his brother that he wouldn't do a Harry and write a tell-all memoir. According to The Sun's Matt Wilkinson, exclusive, Prince Andrew promises King he won't do a Harry and write a tell-all memoir as advanced talks continue to leave Royal Lodge. But that was in October, when Andrew still hoped to negotiate better terms for his departure. Now, in January 2026, with the April eviction deadline looming, his new accommodation not ready, his finances desperate, and publishers showing serious interest, will Andrew keep that promise? Sources suggest Andrew feels his brother has broken promises to him, about his security, about his financial support, about respecting his lease agreement on Royal Lodge. If Andrew feels Charles hasn't kept his word, why should Andrew keep his? The risk calculation. For Andrew, writing this memoir involves weighing several factors: financial gain, potentially millions in advance payments, plus royalties from what would likely be one of the biggest selling royal books in history. Image rehabilitation. His deluded belief that telling his story will somehow make people understand and forgive him. Revenge. The satisfaction of exposing palace secrets and making his family uncomfortable after they've stripped him of everything. Permanent exile. The certainty that publishing such a book would end any remaining relationship with his family and make him a permanent pariah. Legal risk. The possibility that revealing certain conversations or secrets could have legal implications. Publishing ethics. Whether any reputable publisher would actually give a platform to someone accused by multiple Epstein victims to play victim himself. The palace's strategy. Buckingham Palace is reportedly watching this situation with growing alarm. King Charles is dealing with cancer treatment while trying to stabilise and modernise the monarchy. The last thing he needs is his disgraced brother publishing a revenge memoir. According to sources, the palace strategy involves continuing financial support at minimal levels to avoid driving Andrew to desperate measures, accelerating the Royal Lodge eviction to demonstrate consequences, making it clear through back channels that a memoir would result in complete family estrangement, potentially preparing rapid response plans in case the book does get published. But here's the difficult reality. The palace has very limited leverage over Andrew now. They've already stripped his titles, evicted him from his home, and cut him off from royal duties and funding. What more can they threaten him with? Andrew has nothing left to lose, which makes him particularly dangerous. The Epstein Files. More damaging revelations, the recent document dump. As if Andrew's situation wasn't bad enough, recent document dumps from Jeffrey Epstein's estate have provided even more damaging material linking Andrew to Epstein's activities. Flight logs confirm Andrew was a frequent passenger on Epstein's private jet, sometimes travelling with Epstein and Giuffre together. One pilot, David Rogers, testified that Epstein, Andrew and Giuffre travelled to the US Virgin Islands together on April 11, 2001. Photos from Epstein's estate files show Andrew frolicking with a group of women on royal grounds, images that directly contradict his claims of limited contact with Epstein and no knowledge of his activities. Leaked emails from 2011 suggest Andrew gave Giuffre's date of birth and social security number to one of his protection officers, hours before the infamous photograph of him with her was published. This indicates Andrew knew exactly who she was and was researching her background. The network of victims. Giuffre isn't Andrew's only accuser connected to Epstein. Other women have come forward with similar stories about being trafficked to powerful men in Epstein's network, though Andrew is the only royal specifically named. The sheer volume of women telling consistent stories about Epstein's trafficking operation makes Andrew's denials seem increasingly implausible. These aren't isolated accusations from unreliable sources. These are multiple credible witnesses with corroborating details. The 2019 Newsnight disaster. We can't talk about Andrew and Epstein without revisiting the catastrophic 2019 BBC Newsnight interview that effectively ended Andrew's royal career. In that interview, Andrew claimed he couldn't sweat due to an overdose of adrenaline during the Falklands War. Therefore, the story about him sweating profusely while dancing with Giuffre couldn't be true. Said he was at Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter Beatrice on the specific night in question. Suggested the famous photo of him with Giuffre might have been doctored. Showed no empathy for Epstein's victims, described his friendship with Epstein as convenient, said his only regret was the damage to the royal family, not any harm to victims. The interview was so disastrous that within days Andrew was forced to step back from royal duties. It's widely considered one of the worst PR moves in royal history, and yet, despite that experience proving that Andrew is terrible at defending himself publicly, he apparently believes a memoir will somehow work out better. Could this memoir actually get published? Publishing ethics question. Here's a question that needs to be asked. Should any reputable publisher give a platform to someone accused by multiple Jeffrey Epstein victims to paint himself as a Me Too victim? Yes, Andrew has never been criminally charged. Yes, he settled his civil case without admitting guilt. Yes, he maintains his innocence. But the allegations against him are specific, detailed, and corroborated. The posthumous memoir of one of his accusers just reignited global outrage. The evidence linking him to Epstein is overwhelming. Is there a single reputable publisher who would be willing to weather the inevitable backlash, boycotts, and moral outrage that would come from giving Andrew a platform to play victim? The market reality. From a purely commercial perspective, Andrew's memoir would sell millions of copies. The combination of royal scandal, Epstein connections, palace secrets, and Andrew's victim narrative would make it irresistible to huge portions of the public, even those who find him reprehensible. Publishers know this, that's why several houses have expressed huge interest, but publishers also care about their reputations. After the Task Me Too movement, after renewed focus on victim advocacy, after the public response to Giuffre's tragic suicide and posthumous memoir, would any major publisher really want to be the company that gave Prince Andrew a platform? Some possibilities. A major publisher might take it on, but donate all profits to victim advocacy organisations. A smaller, more controversial publisher might see it as worth the backlash Andrew might self-publish, or use a foreign publisher. The manuscript might get leaked or excerpted rather than formally published. What would actually be in it? If Andrew does write this memoir, what would it actually say? Based on sources describing his mindset, here's what we might expect. His victim narrative. How he's been unfairly targeted by the Knox Me Too movement. How his association with Epstein has been mischaracterized. How the media destroyed his reputation without evidence. The Pizza Express defense. Detailed accounts of his whereabouts during the specific encounters Giuffre described, complete with proof that contradicts her timeline. The photo controversy, his explanation for the famous photograph, possibly suggesting it was doctored or taken out of context. Character assassination of accusers, likely attempts to undermine Giuffre's credibility and question her motives. Palace secrets, damaging revelations about his family to punish them for abandoning him. Financial justifications, explanations for how he afforded his lifestyle and the settlement. Betrayal by the firm, how the royal family failed to protect him and threw him to the wolves to protect the institution. The fact-check problem. Here's a major issue Andrew would face. Any memoir he writes would be immediately and exhaustively fact-checked by journalists worldwide. Every claim would be investigated, every timeline scrutinised, every assertion challenged. Given how poorly his previous public statements have held up to scrutiny, remember the Pizza Express alibi, it's hard to imagine Andrew's memoir would fare any better. In fact, The intense fact-checking could end up causing more damage to Andrew than if he'd never written the book at all. Conclusion: a deluded man's desperate gambit, the tragedy of delusion. As we step back and look at everything we've discussed today, what emerges is a portrait of a deeply deluded man making increasingly desperate decisions. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, stripped of his titles, evicted from his home, estranged from his family, facing potential homelessness by April, financially desperate and internationally reviled, apparently believes that writing a memoir positioning himself as a Me Too victim will somehow improve his situation. It's a level of delusion that would be almost comedic if the underlying allegations weren't so serious, and the actual victims weren't real people whose lives were destroyed by Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation. What this reveals about Andrew. The memoir plan tells us several things about Andrew's current state of mind. He lacks all self-awareness. He genuinely doesn't understand why people find him reprehensible. He thinks he's the victim of unfair persecution, not someone being held accountable for terrible judgment at best and criminal complicity at worst. He's financially desperate. The fact that he's willing to burn every remaining bridge with his family for a book advance shows just how dire his financial situation has become. He wants revenge. Part of this is about punishing King Charles and the rest of the family for abandoning him. The threat of exposing palace secrets is his last remaining leverage. He's isolated. When you're talking to teddy bears for companionship and your only remaining option is to sell out your family for money, you've reached a dark place indeed. The palace's impossible position. For King Charles and Buckingham Palace, Andrew's potential memoir represents a no-win situation. If they give in to his demands, provide more money, let him stay at Royal Lodge, restore some privileges, they're essentially rewarding bad behaviour and showing that threats work. If they hold firm, proceed with eviction, maintain financial pressure, refuse to negotiate, they risk Andrew going nuclear with a tell-all that exposes decades of palace secrets. There's no good option here, only degrees of damage control. The questions we're left with: will Andrew actually write this memoir? Or is this just positioning, using the threat to try to negotiate better terms from his brother? Would any reputable publisher actually take it on? Or would the backlash be too severe? If it gets published, what secrets would Andrew actually reveal? Would he really go as far as exposing truly damaging information about his family? Would the book rehabilitate his image as he hopes? Or would it make things even worse by reminding everyone of his connections to Epstein? Could there be legal consequences if Andrew reveals certain protected conversations or state secrets? What happens when the April eviction deadline arrives and Andrew's new home still isn't ready? The broader context. This story is about more than just one disgraced royal. It's about accountability for powerful men in the post-Me Too era. It's about whether wealth and title can still shield someone from consequences. It's about the tension between freedom of speech and giving a platform to those accused of serious wrongdoing. It's also about the changing nature of the monarchy itself. King Charles has taken the extraordinary step of stripping his own brother of his birthright titles and evicting him from his home. This represents a new willingness to prioritise the institution over individual family members. But Andrew's potential memoir shows the limits of that strategy. You can strip someone of titles and homes, but you can't strip them of knowledge and the willingness to use it. What 2026 holds, as we move through 2026, several key dates loom: April 5th, Easter, Andrew's eviction deadline from Royal Lodge, mid-2026, possible publication of Andrew's memoir if he's found a publisher, ongoing, continued financial pressure on Andrew as his legal costs mount. This story is far from over. In fact, it may be about to enter its most explosive chapter yet. Final thoughts. Is Andrew planning a tell-all memoir to paint himself as a victim? Multiple sources say yes. Multiple publishers are reportedly interested. Andrew is financially desperate, professionally ruined, and apparently deluded enough to think this could help him. Should this memoir be published? That's a question every potential publisher, literary agent, and bookseller will have to answer for themselves. Are commercial considerations more important than ethical ones? Is there any story Andrew could tell that would justify giving him a platform? For Buckingham Palace, the next few months represent a nightmare scenario. They have a family member with decades of insider knowledge, nothing left to lose, and apparently a willingness to say anything if the price is right. For Andrew's accusers and Epstein's victims, the idea of him positioning himself as a Me Too victim rather than someone held accountable must be absolutely sickening. And for the British public, watching a disgraced royal who lived rent-free in a mansion for decades while associating with a convicted sex trafficker now claim he's the victim is the kind of moral obscenity that defies belief. Yet here we are. April is coming. The deadline looms. Andrew is cornered. And a desperate, deluded man might be about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Your thoughts. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Andrew will actually write this memoir? Would any reputable publisher take it on? Should he be given a platform to tell his story? Do you believe his victim narrative, or is it the height of delusion? What secrets might he reveal about the royal family if he does publish? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This is obviously a sensitive and disturbing topic, so let's keep the discussion respectful while still being honest about what we're dealing with here. If you found this deep dive valuable, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any updates on this developing story. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.